Hey, Caroline, how are you today?
Fantastic, Rob.
Well, that was a long fan, so that's a good sign. Well, speaking of fantastic, nothing beats fantastic like talking benefits. Well, at least to some of us. But in honesty, today's guests are great because we're talking about a type of coverage that a lot of people might not be familiar with. It's called special risk insurance. And frankly, it should be called special coverage insurance. And why I say that is that depending on your workforce, depending on your industry, you might have a lot of workers that might not be covered under your traditional benefits plan, but you can still get them special insurance. Or vice versa, if they're in a high risk occupation or have to do high risk travel, that most people aren't aware that maybe your standard benefits plan isn't made out to what it's to be from a coverage standpoint. And we're going to talk to two ladies today from Beneva. And Beneva is one of the largest employee benefit providers in Canada, so which is great.
Yes, Rob, I am very much looking forward to welcoming Mylène Desjardins, an account executive, and Rosy Rosario, also account executive. And, really, when we talk about modernizing benefits and really protecting everyone, it's not just who traditionally fits into the past contract of your insurance. Let's throw that out and look at ways to make sure everyone has coverage. And let's find out what they do. Let's bring them in.
Let's go.
Good. So, welcome to the Benefits Alliance podcast. We're so very intrigued to speak with both of you today. We're welcoming from Beneva two guest speakers, and I'll ask you both to introduce yourself and a little bit of your background and why you're passionate about this topic today. So, let's start off with Mylène Desjardins. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having us, and thanks for choosing this topic to talk about today because I'm very excited and passionate about specialized risk. I'm the account executive here in Nova Scotia. I'm located in Halifax, and I look after the Atlantic provinces. And now, recently, I have now been also given the province of Ontario. So, very exciting, very great, interesting conversations with new advisors that I normally wouldn't have connected with in the past. So very good. I've been in the specialized risk space for quite some time. I used to be with AXA. I don't know if you remember AXA Assurances, and then they were acquired by SSQ way back in 2012, and now SSQ has become Beneva. So I started with specialized risk and then touched a little bit on the group benefits and then went back to specialized risk. And that was a decision that was made last year. It just made a lot more sense. And I'll pass it over to my colleague, Rosy.
Thanks, Mylène. Thanks again for having us on. So my name is Rosy Rosario, and I am the account executive for our specialized risk market here in Western Canada. I've been with Beneva for well over 6.5 years now. I've always worked in the traditional space in terms of benefits, but I've been servicing in terms of the special risk for, as long as I've been here at Beneva. But I took on the account executive role here just last year in April. So new to the sales role, but certainly not new to benefits by any means.
Well, this is great. We really appreciate both of you joining us today. And as we start a new year, and it's what continues, it seems like in this decade, is a decade of uncertainty. And as an advisor, I can say that all these companies are looking at options in terms of, modernizing their benefits program that we talk about, but also a lot of companies might not be aware of just modernizing their risk when it comes to having the right products in place for their staff or certain group of employees. So for the listeners listening today, define in simplicity terms for them, what is specialty risk insurance one? And maybe how does this differ from, say, a traditional benefit insurance risk that they might have in place?
Sure, yeah. So special risk is really designed for situations where your traditional group insurance plans fall short. So our specialty risk offer at Beneva will provide protection for unique or higher risk profiles, which are typically not covered under our traditional group benefits plans. So, unlike our traditional group insurance plans that assume predictable and low to moderate risk, the specialty risk really addresses those high risk or non traditional exposures that It's done through custom underwriting and custom pricing. And the reason it's crucial is because it fills those critical gaps, which typically for plan sponsors, they either have employees that are underinsured or uninsurable through their traditional group plan.
Great. And yeah, just to dive a little deeper, if I think about companies across Canada, everybody has all sorts of different employee base and what they look like. So could you share like some examples specifically of individuals or groups that typically fall outside of a standard insurance plan?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. So think of like stunt performers. They fall out of the standard traditional benefits. We also have CEOs that travel on company owned aircrafts. Um, we have volunteers that go into disaster areas, as well as journalists that are reporting from, high risk regions. These individuals all fall under, a situation where they typically would not be covered under their traditional group plan, and would require specialized risk to cover them. Otherwise, they would be considered to be underinsured under the group plan.
Or just to kind of add to what Rosie just mentioned, it's not that they're uninsurable, it's just that that risk is typically excluded from a group insurance product. And under the exclusions and limitations, for example, when you're talking about a travel product, you don't cover individuals in zones that are considered, war zones. And so for journalists, like she mentioned, that's their job, is to go and, in these high risk areas of the world where the government of Canada recommends to avoid all travel. But this is their job, and you need to make sure that they are properly insured. And so this is where the specialized risk group, insurance policy comes in and plays that vital role in ensuring that they are properly covered in the event that there's, an accidental injury or illness or even, accidental death.
That's a great point to make, Mylene, because I always tell all our clients, and I know benefits clients, we talk about it, that hey, the insurance companies are in the business to pay claims, but there's also a reason why sometimes contracts are 2 inches thick. And if there is a giant claim that might be questionable, that people investigate, or one, the insurers can say, well, based on our contract, we're not paying under those definitions. But also two, the morally importance is now is people have to understand what they're buying, right? Is that so critical more than ever before? So maybe walk us through, for the advisors that are listening to us today, what are some good questions that they should be asking their clients? Because sometimes this conversation doesn't come up until somebody says, oh yeah, by the way, we rented a private jet, or we have a private jet and we're taking our 5 executives to away for a business meeting, ABC, or a bunch of staff to a meeting. So walk us through, like, maybe some the role that advisors should play, or roles that you know advisors, or questions, sorry, they should be asking.
In all honesty, Rob, a lot of that typically comes up in conversation. When you, as an advisor, meet with your client, and you start just talking, and it really speaks to the relationship that you have with your clients, and being kind of really aware of, okay, so, anything changed, or are you planning on hiring foreign workers, for example? Or, did you acquire a new aircraft, or do you guys, like you mentioned, booked a private plane, where you would talk about, the entire executive team is flying on that same aircraft. Well, again, this is where the specialized risk comes into play, because under your traditional offer, there would most likely be a stipulation under there that would say they would not recommend that you all board the same plane and, and fly. And so all these different risks usually come, through conversation. And then Rosie and I, that's our role as well, is to support advisors and their clients into identifying and seeing what could potentially kind of fill that risk, or insure that risk, if you will. So it's really important, and there's a wide range. I mean, that's the beauty with specialized risk, is it's not a perfect little box, and I think that's why a lot of people struggle with it as well. It's because it's not always very clear. But when you kind of simplify it and have the conversation, and to say, okay, well, sure, you can rent that jet, but let's make sure that you're well insured in the event that something happens, and to make sure that that catastrophic loss, for example, covers you sufficiently for everybody. So that's, those are just types of conversations. And just to bring it back, even if we're talking about an AD&D product, which typically it matches the life insurance. Well, for some executives, they typically fall under a much higher life insurance, a principal sum amount, if you will. And if the AD&D matches it, that's fine. But if that executive is required to travel on behalf of the organization and travel to high risk areas. So if you're thinking about, mining industry, for example, where they are required sometimes to go in those high risk areas, well, that is where specialty risk comes in as well. It's because you have to make sure that they're properly, that risk is properly insured in the event. And so we have the ability to offer a higher amount under the accidental death and dismemberment benefit.
Oh, that's great. And I know Caroline wants to jump in here, but I got one more good question for you. So, especially, traditional plans are kind of like black, white. Here's my coverage. The unique things that I'm assuming you can do is, it's probably a loaded question for you more, is, right, can we get really detailed in a for a client as well? If, as you said, it's a mining situation and they're going to be traveling so many times on a private jet. So we can get like real specific in a contract, but the client and the advisor have to make sure we get a very detailed kind of fact find back to you.
Absolutely. And that is the nature of special risk, is the fact that it is a self-administered program whereby we do advise, okay, so if you want us to insure the risk, let's say that they own their own aircraft, which, if you think about electrical companies, for example, that's quite normal that they have their own aircraft and they can come and go as they wish. So we would need the information about the absolute, the aircraft, the airworthiness, the licensing. We need to know how many trips did they take, how many individuals traveled on that plane, where did they travel to. So all that data, all that risk, we need to be made aware of and to underwrite the risk appropriately. And so when that information is missing, then, we make assumptions and it may not be correct. And so we are very, very diligent with needing those specific information, and that is all captured in the contract as well.
Yeah. I'm putting myself in the shoes of, your typical employer, business owner, and even the advisor to some degree. I think the underlying theme, if I had to pick one for today's podcast, is don't assume that somebody cannot get coverage, right? Just think about, who do I work with? And it's particularly gray these days when there's a lot of people working from home, working off site, post pandemic, a lot of virtual remote people. I think both business owners should say, like, forget the old way of insurance and say, here's my employees, but actually, here's all of my employees. And can you do something with that?
Mm-hmm.
And same, as Rob says, day in and day out, it's great if you're on site meeting with the business owner and having that chat and learning things, but probably that extra question of like, who else is working with you that I am not visibly seeing here today, right? And tell me what they do. So with that said, I am leading up to a question. Can you think of like an example where special risk insurance made such a critical difference for a business owner, employer, and a family ultimately?
Yeah, absolutely. So we can share a story about, a critical illness claim. So an individual was diagnosed with cancer. And as a result, they made a claim under their critical illness policy, which they received a tax free payout of $50,000, which was the guaranteed issue amount under the policy. So with that amount, has nothing to do with, if they are currently getting long-term disability under their traditional group plan. It's not attached to any other benefits. So the insurer would pay the tax-free lump sum regardless of other streams of income that are being received as a result of the disability. And so the insured also has the ability to decide how they're going to use those funds. So in this particular case, this individual use those funds to pay for additional treatment that was not covered through the provincial plan or through the group insurance traditional plan. And then with any money left over, they decided to install a swimming pool in their backyard for their two young children. So not only did this allow for this individual to really concentrate on their recovery and getting back to, they were, but also improving the quality of life for their family when they're going through such a challenging time. So absolutely, it's a big, big piece, I think, for somebody who's struggling or going through a difficult time to have that additional sum of money come through.
Another good example as well, just to kind of, echo what Rosie just said. So we do have obviously the standalone critical illness program that we can implement. But if you think about AD&D again, when it's specific occupations, if I take policemen, for example, we have the ability to add a double indemnity in the event that the accidental death occurs while on the job. And so that again can be quite life changing, if you will, for lack of a better word. But if in the event that a police officer dies while on duty, the beneficiary gets double the indemnity. So if they have $100,000 under the AD&D, but because the loss occurred while at work, then they are eligible for $200,000. And this is in addition to the life insurance policy. And so, it's really kind of important to think about. I mean, it sounds horrific when you talk about an accidental death while on the job, but when you think about that policeman's family that received those funds and they had no idea about the double indemnity, it's quite impactful. And you do see the effects that it has because the financial impact that it has on the family, on the beneficiaries.
So, what are some examples of some special risk insurance products that Beneva would sell on a regular basis?
So on a regular basis, obviously AD&D is always, the top one. And the standalone emergency medical travel is another one that's becoming more and more because what we're seeing is the travel that's offered under a traditional offering doesn't always meet the needs of the organization or the employer. The other one that's starting to gain a little bit of momentum, well, critical illness, definitely, that's gaining momentum. And firefighters insurance, like for those specific occupations. So we do have a product for firefighters and they have a presumptive cancer benefit. It's a flat amount that's paid out, but when you're talking about those types of occupations, presumptive cancer is one that's, very top of mind for them. And a lot of these organizations also have collective agreements where, it is stipulated in their own collective agreements that a certain level of coverage is needed for those types of occupations. And so this is where the specialized risk, comes in and adds a nice complement to their, they could potentially have, or maybe they don't, but if they have traditional group insurance, but the specialized risk policy complements it quite nicely as well.
Don't
Awesome.
forget impact coverage as well. So there's a lot of organizations that are bringing in foreign workers. So that is one that we have seen that has definitely taken off in the last couple of years for sure.
Great point. Very important.
Amazing. So yeah, as we wrap things up, I'm thinking here, you know what? I want to give a shout out to Beneva. Like you really are, when we think at Benefits Alliance about modernizing benefits, looking at, at the end of the day, an employer, a business owner wants to make sure they're taking care of all of their people, not just some of the people that fit in the traditional box of things. And Rob, I think it's fitting to have you as the final comments as an advisor talking to several business owners. Your thoughts on this and what this means for Canadians ultimately.
Yeah, and then maybe I'll pose it with a final question. I think it's great, and I think we touched on a lot of ways. Is that it's an evolving landscape of companies in insurance risks in an area that, especially from a geopolitical standpoint, and as we advise, like high risk employees in certain areas that we've used the phrase before. Surprises are for birthdays, they're not for insurance. So you got to understand what you're buying more than anything, and more so the importance of asking the right questions and so companies should know that there's a solution out there, that if you're looking to maybe do something unique for a certain group of workers or teammates, or just to add that extra layer of coverage and peace of mind, when people are traveling, as an example, from a work standpoint or just based on their duties, I think it's critical. And, those are kind of those importance of if employees are looking for, if companies are looking to attract and retain employees in certain areas, I think these are great offerings that anybody could add. So if I wasn't aware, Rosie, Mylène, around special risk, what kind of advice would you give to advisors that are looking to stay ahead of an ever-changing insurance landscape and why they should consider special risk from your standpoint?
Well, that is a loaded question.
I ask lots of loaded questions.
Um, and to be honest with you, that is why Beneva has made the decision in the past. So last year and the prior years, account execs would look after all of it. Specialty risk and traditional. And so in principle, it makes kind of like makes sense. But really, it's a lot of information to know and be able to be an expert, if you will, on everything benefits related. It just became too much. And so that's why we decided to just return to the way that it used to be and have dedicated account execs just for specialized risk. And which is why we're tag teaming with our colleagues and with other account execs that only look after traditional. And having that enables us to really kind of make sure that we stay current as well with the market and that we also are there to provide support to our advisors because advisors come to us and they rely on us for our expertise and our guidance as you're having those conversations with your clients. And so that's the main reason why. And really, if you can think of a risk that you're like, my gosh, I don't know if we can do it, it's worthy of a conversation. It's always worthy of just looking to see, well, what's available out there. Because the whole notion of employee employer is not always true when you're talking about specialized risk as well, right? I mean, we have lots of enforced policies that it's really board of directors that need to travel within Canada on behalf of that organization. Well, we have coverage for that in the event that something happens. It's all accidental, but nonetheless, they're great little products, and it provides great. It's a great way to attract as well, and have those board of directors feel like they are well covered in the event that something happens if they have to travel on behalf of that organization. So there's lots of different interesting things that we can do on the specialized risk.
Great. Awesome. Well, what a great episode. I learned always, in each of these episodes that we film, I always learn something, and that's a good sign to walk away with it. I want to thank you both, Rosie and Mylène, for joining us, and keep up the great work. It's great to keep evolving insurance and have it feel like it's protecting, everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for joining us.
But
This has been the Benefits Alliance Voice. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your network and be sure to check out the podcast notes for any additional materials.